Hello, Internet, and welcome to another episode of Experimental Cataclysm, the show where we talk about recent changes to the experimental version of Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. Now, I didn't see very much to talk about this week. There's really only one big thing, which would be pain. Everything else is something short and quick. I don't know if that's going to make for a bad show, but hit me up in the comments if there was anything major that I missed. And it's worth mentioning here, we're having a very severe windstorm, so you may hear my windows rattling, the doors opening and closing, just old house things. You might hear the roof collapse on me, you might hear me screaming for help, things like that. Very standard stuff. So first up today from Rennick, we've got a change to drop damage. Now, a while back we had an addition that made it so that enemies or the player would take damage if you dropped an item on them from a higher Z level. After that, we had a lot of shenanigans. There were people posting images of them dropping very lightweight items like flags or pillows on enemies, and the enemy would be killed by it. There were also issues of players dying when things would fall on top of them, which is not great. This change should now make it so that there's some more complex math and formula behind this system, and it should make it so that when an item is dropped on them, it will be less damage. This significantly reduced the fall damage for many objects, including heavy things. So the example given in the PR was dropping a wasp, which came about due to an issue related to a wasp falling on someone and killing them. Now, it's a strange metric, I know, but there you go. It was measured using wasp corpses. Now it says here before the PR 1Z level with a wasp drop would cause 481 damage, and after the PR it would deal around 32 damage. Now this is an enormous reduction, so I figured you would want to know that. There was also a pretty big discussion in the initial wasp issue about how this should be handled, although it looks like things got a little heated there. People were debating, is it hard, is it soft, is it flexible, would that make a difference with fall damage? And other people were saying, well, it doesn't really matter because they're like 86 kilos and dropping 86 kilos on someone is significant really regardless. But there will be a link to the PR and ideally the issue in my description, so if you want to check that out, you can check that out. Beyond those things, I have no real thoughts here. Reining in drop damage makes a lot of sense based on the dropping a flag on an enemy and killing them. Screenshots and all that kind of stuff obviously didn't make a whole lot of sense, but I have no opinions here on the math that was used to determine damage. That's not really my forte. Next up today, also from Rennick, we've got a change to vehicle dragging. Now this all started with an issue from E.P. Simpson pointing out that casters actually made carts harder to move than carts that had no wheels or casters at all. Simply dragging around the cart without wheels or casters actually was much easier than once you put the wheels on. There was a discussion around this and a couple of PRs that came out of it. So for Rennick here, it looks like any cart below 100 kilograms was essentially free to move around with no strength requirement or anything like that. And this PR made it so that there is, in fact, a strength requirement for anything around 10 kilograms, anything above that. It should make wheelless vehicles a little harder to move around in a lot of circumstances because you're much more likely to breach the 10 kilogram threshold than you were the 100 kilogram threshold. Now the initial issue opened about this has not really been resolved by that PR as far as I can tell. It looks like there was a second PR from Worming Dead that split casters into large and small variants, although it's unclear to me if that's going to fix some of these wheelless vehicle issues or not. I'm still not really sure why they were harder to drag with casters than without them. However, regardless, there were two tweaks, here to vehicles that will affect cart users, and especially those of us who don't even bother putting casters on them. As to whether or not the actual issue was resolved, I'm not really clear on that, but there you go, a couple vehicle changes. Next up today from Rannick Ortega, we've got a PR that adds some more achievements. Now these were for reading certain amounts of books, having bones broken, healing damage, and for reaching the new Lixa location that we discussed previously. There's really not much to say about this. I haven't seen new achievements in a while, so I thought I would mention it, and also this show is probably super short, so I figured I would pad out the runtime a little bit. Moving on, next up today from Balthazar Argal, example, we've got the removal of the rapid strike technique from knives. Now the logic here is that knives already have a very low attack cost, and when you add rapid strike on top of that, their DPS gets a little bit crazy. Now before the bayonet rework, combat knives were a go-to weapon for a lot of people for that exact reason. Their DPS and overall value were better than a lot of nearly identical weapons. And because this is a change to something that was pretty meta previously, I'm sure this will anger some people, potentially even a lot of people. I have no firm opinion on this as of right now, just I don't care. My general take is something along the lines of what was said in the PR here by Risuga, which is that the rapid strike technique should be reserved for a normal speed or slow weapon that can be utilized to make rapid strikes on occasion when there's a window for that type of attack. Knives already have a very fast attack speed to reflect their size and ease of use, so we really shouldn't stack rapid strike on top of that in my opinion. Now regardless, there you go. A lot of knives had this technique removed, and there was a follow-up PR that affected one of the bayonets that they initially missed. I don't know, let me know in the comments how you feel about this change. I know that knives previously were highly valued like 6 months ago, but now we've had 2 major nerfs to knives, and I think both nerfs actually made sense individually, but I know how people get upset over these things, and I don't know if combined they're going to make knives pretty useless. I'm not sure. But regardless, I'm on board for the change. Let me know what you think. Next up today from Ranik Ortega, we've got the addition of photos that will now appear in homes. Now these are exactly what they sound like, photos that you can find in houses that in some way reflect the owners that once lived there. Now I'm a fan of these things in general. I try to always read them out when we find them in a video or something like that. As long as they have enough variance that you don't see the same description over and over and over, I think they're pretty good. Unfortunately, I keep finding that one photo that says oh, this person looks like a zombie that you've seen, and that's pretty bad when you get that. I literally, in my last episode, I think I got them back to back. 2 separate photos I looked at had the exact same description, one after the other, and that was very annoying. But anyway, these pictures are not just photos. One that is shown in the PR is actually a puzzle that someone completed and had framed, which made me think of my grandma, and therefore I find it valuable. Now there's a comment that was added to explain just how to contribute to these photos, what their intention is, basic guidelines, that sort of thing. And like with the nightmares that we talked about in the last episode, this seems like something that would be very easy to add to if someone's looking for something to contribute. Although I guess I keep saying that because to me creative writing is like something I value and do in my free time, so to me it seems like an easy contribution. I don't know if other people actually feel that way. Now regardless, I should have been showing you a few examples throughout this segment, and yeah, I just sort of like this flavor stuff as long as it's executed properly. And then finally today, which yes, I know it's a short show, I'm sorry. Finally today, we've got massive pain changes that you probably have already noticed and or were frustrated by. Now to boil this down to a very brief summary, pain is now much more significant than it was previously, reducing your stats significantly to the point that you are actually truly debilitated and unable to function. And while in theory this does make sense, humans can absolutely be overwhelmed and essentially paralyzed by pain, I don't love this in terms of gameplay. Now we'll talk about some of this a little bit, but honestly I'm a bit frustrated by the current implementation of this, and I'm afraid that if I really try to break it down, I will end up rambling and sometimes, I say things that sound really harsh or unkind when I don't necessarily mean them to sound that way, and then people get upset and it's complicated. And now that I've written the script, I can tell you it's a little bit rambly, so we're just gonna plow into it, I guess. Anyway, in fact, I guess I don't even really know how to explain the change itself because it's really straightforward and immediately evident upon playing the game. Pain reduces your stats, it reduces your speed, and it's very significant. You will probably dislike its current implementation based on what I have heard from essentially every player I've talked to. And that's not to say it's bad. I'm not trying to disrespect the creator here, which is Guardian DLL. I don't know if I mentioned that at any point up until now. It just, in my opinion, needs a lot of other things to change to accommodate this change, which makes it kind of touchy at the moment. And I feel that some of those follow-up PRs should have been made before the Pain PR was merged. For example, ERC outlined several issues that need to be examined for the new system to really work properly. One of the obvious ones is that Pain has an enormous impact on your player's speed, which makes sense for severe pain but not for minor injuries. If you get a series of bumps and bruises in rapid succession, your speed shouldn't tank from that. If you get shot in the chest, then sure, you're probably not too mobile and nimble and quick on your feet and all that stuff. But the lack of this distinction means that pain, which stacks, is just straight up debilitating, really regardless of the circumstances that led to those injuries. Now, this was also something discussed in an issue by Fairy Armadillo, who pointed out that we should probably have thresholds for pain. Or is that phrased properly? We should have thresholds for injuries that determine how much pain they cause. Is that a better phrasing, I think? Now, I support this really aggressively. Most injuries in this game are really minor injuries that do a low amount of damage, but they all stack together, so if you get enough of them, you are debilitated as though you were in like a car accident. And while injuries would be cumulative, a series of scratches and bruises are not the same thing as being shot or ejected from a car in terms of pain or the effect they would have on our body. I strongly support thresholds in some capacity, even if it's not exactly as Fairy Armadillo outlined here. Now, I also believe this should not have been implemented prior to the wound system. This is something we've been talking about for many years, probably 4 years at this point. There were plans to implement a grand wound system and wound treatment system. This would add variability and treatments that we don't currently have in the game, and effects for those treatments or those injuries. In other words, you get cut open, well, I guess you could clean the wound, disinfect the wound, maybe suture the wound, and then change the bandage regularly to heal. And throughout that process, your wound would be changing, which would give you different effects based on its severity, whether it's infected, that sort of thing. However, currently in the game, you get a wound, the wound causes a flat amount of pain, and your only recourse to change that is to take painkillers and wait for time to pass. So this is not a very robust system, and it's, again, in my opinion, should not have been changed until we had more granularity to wounds so they would give different amounts of pain based on the injury type. It would also give us more recourse on how to clean and treat those wounds to remove their pain penalties over time. Now, obviously, taking painkillers is still how humans get rid of pain, but an infected wound versus an uninfected wound versus a scratch versus a deep cut, all of those things would affect your pain. And without any of those things, we just, get this cumulative pain that is eventually debilitating. And then there's the fact that many things in this game already give you stat reductions, they cause pain at random, and things like that. These things will all stack, so taking damage from an ongoing effect is going to cause more pain, which will then stack with your existing pain and eventually lead you to be just really debilitated. You getting poisoned or something like that already reduces your stats, and then on top of that can cause pain periodically, which will then further reduce your stats. And that, I don't know if that makes sense. Basically what I mean is that when we make an effect like that, we're balancing the stat reduction with what we think is appropriate. But now pain actually causes more stat reduction and speed reduction on top of those initial penalties that we balanced the game for. So basically everything that has an effect that can cause pain is no longer balanced, because now we have to account for the stat reduction from that pain. Hopefully that makes sense. And while to some extent these things reflect reality, right? They stack and they make you useless. That's how we would be affected in real life. It is currently entirely too severe in my opinion and needs dialed in significantly. Now anyway, I don't know if I formulated my thoughts correctly, and I'll be honest, I'm having a pretty bad day, which usually makes me a little less expressive and a little bit more rambly. My take overall is that pain should be debilitating and reduce your stats, but only in circumstances where it makes sense. This should not be a huge stacking penalty because I have been bumped or bruised or scratched repeatedly. This should be something that reflects a severe injury that would cause your character to have significantly less function. With its cumulative nature from small injuries or chip damage, this is currently insanely overtuned in my opinion and has made the game just significantly less fun for me personally. I do not object to the PR in theory. I just believe a lot more should have been done before this pain change was made. If we knew this was coming, we should have changed some of these other symptoms to prepare for that. And when I say things like that, people often get angry at me and say well, that's the point of experimental. We break things and then we fix them and etc. And to some extent, that is absolutely true. That is, some of this is to be expected. However, I just think someone should have pointed out what a severe impact this would have on gameplay at the moment it was merged, rather than saying, oh, we'll fix this over the next 2 years to have it make more more sense. And I appreciate people who plan for the future. I know Irk is a big planner, immediately made an issue to talk about what kind of has to change for this pain stuff to make sense, but I'm also aware enough of this game's development to know that many of these things will be put off for months or years or never implemented at all. Like how we had a whole plan for death, decay, and disease that was supposed to come around 0.D, none of which is currently implemented in the game. Or the wound system that we mentioned, which people have talked about literally for years and planned a robust wound system literally for years. It's desired by pretty much everyone, but it has not progressed. I'm not saying this is anyone in particular's fault, I'm just saying that outlining something and making huge gameplay affecting changes that then hinge on more changes to function properly is concerning in my opinion. Anyway, rant over. I don't know if all of that will make sense or if I'm being too aggro about it or whatever, but I'm largely unhappy about the gameplay effect of this PR currently. I like it in theory, but the implementation in my opinion is having a huge impact on gameplay at the moment. Impact. And honestly, it's not a positive experience it's not just me. I was going to say it's making me unhappy and I'm not enjoying the game, but this seems to be an issue for many people based on my comments. So there you go. I don't know, man. With that, the show comes to a close. After the rant, I guess it's a little longer than I expected it to be, although there were very few changes I actually wanted to talk about. Please let me know if I missed anything. By the way, it's one of those weeks where I just didn't have anything to talk about and it makes me feel like I must have missed something that was important. So hit me up in the comments if I missed something that happened before the cutoff date of the video. For now, everyone, thank you for watching. I guess let me know what you think about the pain stuff. I appreciate that you listened to me rant, and I'll be back in a couple weeks with another episode, so I'll see you next time.